saw the title of this session, Big Data, Causality and Ethics, I felt like a mix of excitement and a little bit of discomfort. Excitement, because there are three words that like shape how we understand the world today, and discomfort because me as a historian, I mainly do what things. I work with an archive, so uh, I look at handwritten letters, diplomatic cables, yellowed newspapers, fragmented statistics. So I deal with unique, with unrepeatable. So I asked myself, what can I provide for this session, not only from the perspective of big data, but also from the perspective as a historian. And the answer, I believe, lies in the word that many historians feel very dear to their hearts, and this word is causality. So I will demonstrate the presentation I prepared for our discussion. And uh, before I start, I wanted like um, to ask you what background you have. So just to like um, prepare myself, which statements should I highlight and which are like obvious to you. So maybe just a little bit of introduction.
Hi, very good afternoon, Nikita. I'm Dr.
Hi.
Lightstrom Jitendra Singh. I am primarily a historian. We are same in that way. I primarily research on oral historiography and how orality and memory can bring about the various nuances of history which has been hidden, as Dr. Sandeep Tripathi was also saying. And when we were talking about, I am primarily coming from a northeastern, from a borderland, from Indo-Myanmar border. There is a small state called Manipur. Very recently only there is a normalcy in our part of the world. So primarily my idea of being in FGS, Forum for Global Studies, is primarily on giving history as an impetus for understanding geopolitics, which very few has been going on. And moreover, with the coming up of lots of other forum like G8 and all those things, what we don't see is the narrative from where history can play a very important role. And for that perspective to happen, from what I been trained and what I have been working through, the various idea of morality and history needs to be at the forefront for histories which are not mainstream. So my very conceptualization of what idea you are going to give is also going to be a very interesting take on how history can be at the forefront of geopolitics also, and what we see is happening in and around Central Asia, or what is happening in Iran, Iraq also. It's a way of situating one's history as a measure and another as the minor. So the very idea of periphery and mainstream, the idea of us and them, is a very pertinent thing for me to take forward. And with Dr. Sandeep Tripathi ji, we have been working very closely on the idea of borderland in the forefront of geopolitics and history. Thank you so much, and it's a very open. Your opening remark is also quite very pertinent for the day and age with which we are living. So we will have a very good knowledge exchange, and hope all the participants will also bring about good idea and knowledge exchange for the forefront of our subject. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very interesting that I also my PhD was in the realm of collective memory. So I worked with some oral history, trying to dissect the collective memory of certain events of the past. So that's and the work with this kind of uh, this kind of research problems really made me appreciate how history as a discipline pose ethical awareness into you as a researcher. And when you see the causes, the causalities in the line of history, it's really bring awareness of how your research should really highlight the proper uh, the proper way of how things came to be, and that's awareness is like it's a key to me. Yeah. So thank you also for sharing uh, your background, and if anyone also wants to share their backgrounds, you're free to do that.
Hi, sir. I am Krishna Kumar
Hi.
Tiwari. I am from Rewa, Madhya Pradesh. I have done my masters in political science subject, and I have currently enrolled as a research scholar for Center for Globalization and Development Study, University of Allahabad. And to joining in this program, I want to know about the how to research in social science and learn about how to use AI to in social science research program, so that I prepare myself for research as a research scholar to solve real problem in the world. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I think that's a noble aim for this session. So this also is a very the AI is a very strong instrument for our research projects and problems we have. Anyone else wants also to join this this session of introduction?
Hello, sir. This is Ishika, and I'm a master's in political science. Currently, I'm a researcher working in the domain of geopolitics and international relations, and I'm currently interested in exploring the arena of AI ethics and digital governance. What I'm interested to know and what I really want to learn is how, since we are living in the era of AI, I want to know and I want to learn and explore how AI can be incorporated in social science researches, since it's a very Herculean task, like amalgamating all the data, and how AI can be ethically incorporated in the research field.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay, then if you also want to present yourself, you can, I think, write a little bit of field of your expertise here in chat. Maybe if someone needs to know a person in some field of expertise, we can like find some connections here. And I will proceed with my message. So I prepared a case for you that's called the case of 1918 when big data meets history. But before I start, can you tell me, do you see the presentation, the first slide? Is everything okay?
It's visible, sir.
Okay. So let me start with the particular case using which I will provide the idea that is very dear for me when we talk about causation, big data, and the ethical dilemmas we have. So let me paint the scene in some detail because context matters. It is October 1918, and the Great War, the First World War that we now call, is in its final desperate weeks. On the battlefields of France and Belgium, the Allied armies are pushing the German forces back. and millions of soldiers are on the move. Troops being rushed to the front, wounded evacuated, and behind the lines, logistical networks operating at the full capacity. And at the same time, a second war is being fought against an invisible enemy. And we know it today as the Spanish flu. So Spanish flu was, I believe, one of the first global pandemics, though it didn't originate in Spain. Its name came from the fact that neutral Spain uncensored press reported on it openly, while wartime censors in other countries downplayed the pandemic and the outbreak of the flu. And the numbers of the Spanish numbers are staggering. Over the course of just 1 year, from 1918 to 1990, the virus infected the estimated 1/3 of the global population. So just imagine that between 50 and 100 million people died. That's more than all the combat deaths of the entire war. And in the United States, life expectancy dropped by 12 years in a single season. In some cities, bodies piled up because there were not enough grave diggers. So the Spanish flu was really a dangerous threat to all the countries. And now put yourself in the shoes of a decision maker in that moment. What data you have? And let's just imagine ourselves that we live in the United States in this period of time when the Spanish flu just break. So here are the global trajectories of the Spanish flu, and we can see here that it affected literally the whole world, and the United States were also in the epicenter of this pandemic. So once again, imagine that we have the capabilities of researching big data that we have today, but we are in the shoes of a policymaker in the United States during the pandemic, and you collect data, you collect all the data, and what data you have? You have telegraph reports from army camps, from hospitals, from local health boards, and you have railway timetables and ship manifests. And you have mortality counts, though they are often delayed or incomplete. And what you do not have is any knowledge of viruses. So the problem is that in 1918, the electron microscope will not be invented for another 10 years or so. And the concept of a virus as a distinct from bacteria is still debated. And most physicians believe the cause of the pandemics is just a bacteria, not a virus, which is actually just a secondary invader and not the primary agent. So you have a lot of data, and you collected all the data as a policymaker in the United States. And you run a simple correlation analysis. And remember, this is exactly the kind of a thing that modern big data tools would do in a second. And you would find something almost too perfect to ignore. So the spread of the pandemic maps almost exactly correlate with the railroad network. So literally the map of the Spanish flu outbreak is very close to the map of the railroads of the United States of America. And in fact, epidemiologists today confirm that the 1918 virus traveled along railway lines, carried by soldiers, carried by civilians, moving by train. So imagine that a data scientist from our time has traveled back to 1918, and he has fed all the available data into a machine learning model. And the model's output is clear. The correlation is close to 100%, and rail movement is the single strongest predictor of the outbreak timing. And the cause, what we should do is would be very logical. We should just stop the railroad traveling, and that should be the case. Now we reach the ethical core of our thought experiment. So you are the head of an emergency committee in America, and you have this prediction. It comes from the machine that has processed more data than any human could, and the correlation is too perfect. But we have 1918 on the doorstep, and the war is ending. And if you shut down the railroads, you will prevent millions of soldiers from returning to their homes for weeks or even months. Moreover, you will halt the delivery of coal, grain, and medicine to cities already strained by wartime shortages. And besides, you will paralyze the economy itself that is desperately trying to transition from war to peace. On the other hand, if you don't shut down the railroads, you may be condemning hundreds or thousands of people to death, a death that is the model says you could prevent. And it's not a hypothetical exercise in ethics. That's a real dilemma that was faced by public health officials in 1918. And it's a dilemma that repeats itself today whenever we confront a new pathogen, new pandemic, a climate crisis, or even a political conflict. And the question I will ask you to try to answer is, well, what will you do? What will you decide if you were a person who was in charge of this matter? And you have three options. First option, a full closure of all railways nationwide for several weeks. So that's the algorithm prediction, and the algorithm says that we should do that. Option B, selective closures. So we only halt rail traffic on routes with the highest mortality rates, and we keep the essential supply lines open. And number C, we reject the algorithm recommendation, and correlation for us doesn't equal causation. And we need to, if we choose number C, we need to understand the cause of the disease before we paralyze the society. So if you have ideas of what you can choose, you can turn on your mic or raise your hand and give your answer.
Options B, sir. Selective closure.
Okay, so your option is which one, A, B, or C?
B.
B. Can you explain your reasoning?
बिकॉज आई वांट टू सप्लाई जो एसेंशियल्स आइटम्स हैं उसको सप्लाई को चेन्स को मेंटेन रखना.
Yes, I think that's a very sound position with this particular with this particular problem that we faced. Are there any other positions or ideas? Maybe someone wants to pick number A. Okay, so if the fascinating part of this dilemma is the fact that each particular assumption that we have here, A, B, or C, is very defensible, but each comes from a very different assumption about the relations between data, knowledge, and action. Option A assumes that a sufficiently strong correlation is legitimate basis for a large-scale intervention, especially when the stakes are life or death. Option B tries to balance the prediction with other social goods. And option C insists that without causal understanding, intervention may be misguided or even harmful. So let's move to the third option, because I think that it's one of the more interesting ones. So imagine that in your emergency committee, there is one person who is not a data analyst, and that person is a microbiologist. For example, one of the microbiology specialists of this period of time was Martha Wallenstein, and she was a pioneer virologist at the era. And she doesn't have access to machine learning. But she, as a doctor, as a virologist, has spent weeks in a makeshift laboratory examining lung tissue from deceased patients under a microscope. And she cannot see the pathogen. Viruses are still invisible with the microscopes of 1918. But she observes something puzzling. The bacterium that most doctors blame is present only in some cases, but the bacterium is absent in others. And she forms a hypothesis that the true culprit is something smaller, something that passes through the finest filters, and it's the thing that we would later call a virus. More importantly, she proposes a logical chain, causal chain. So, like a chain of causes. What causes the problem? An invisible agent enters the respiratory tract. It spreads from person to person through droplets, like, for example, from coughing, from sneezing, from close contact. And the damage is not caused by the trains themselves or from railroads. The trains are simply the routes along which infected people move. And her policy recommendation, therefore, would be different. So if we apply the correlation approach, so we find that the strongest predictor is rail traffic, and therefore we choose to interrupt the predictor, so therefore interrupt the outbreak. That's, I would say, the strong logical chain. but the causal framework says that the mechanism is person-to-person spread. And to interrupt the mechanism, even if it's harder to measure, and we will save lives without causing a secondary catastrophe of hunger or economic collapse. And here is the critical ethical point. The two frameworks would lead to very different interventions, very different distributions of harm, and very different public trust outcomes. The big data approach is seductive because it's quantifiable and seemingly objective. And the causal approach is messier. It relies on a theory that cannot be proved in the moment with the same statistical certainty. Yet, if the microbiologist is right, the causal approach is not only more effective, but also more just, because it doesn't punish entire population for the correlation that was never the root of the cause. And I will move to the case of two cities, the city of Philadelphia and the city of St. Louis. So these two cities chose different options from those that we discussed. And we will discuss the outcomes of those decisions they tried to implement. So let's start with Philadelphia. On September 1918, the city held a massive parade to promote war bonds and to promote civil unity. So military bands, marching soldiers, crowds lining along the streets, and estimated 200,000 people were on the streets. That's a lot of people. Public health officials had warned that the influenza outbreak was growing, but the city leadership decided to just go ahead with the parade. Why? Because in part, the correlation they saw was with troops movements. So they saw the correlation and thought that the troops, the soldiers, they moved by the railroads, and they were the cause of the pandemic. They believed that not the civil members of the society, but not the just ordinary people were the cause, but the soldiers that carried the microbes from Europe, and that was the cause. And so they focused on the correlation with the military rather than the causal mechanism of airborne transmission. And they closed railroads, but didn't do anything with the pandemic ones. For example, they didn't ban the gatherings, they didn't ban the meetings, they didn't ban the big parade. And 3 days after the parade, hospitals were overwhelmed. Within a week, over 1,000 people just died. By the end of the pandemic, Philadelphia had one of the highest death rates of any United States city. Just over 16,000 deaths, and that's just a catastrophe. And now let's contrast that with St. Louis. So St. Louis is another city. And the city health commissioner, Dr. Max Starkloff, acted on the intuition that we can define as a causal intuition. He had no proof of a virus that would come decades later. Proof would come with the invention of sophisticated microscopes. But Dr. Max Starkloff believed that the disease spreads through close contact. And he said that we should ignore this correlation with the railroads. So he didn't ban the railroads, and people could travel through the train network. But he did ban the gatherings of people. And within days of the first cases, Starkloff closed schools, he closed churches, he closed theaters, he closed bars, and he banned public gatherings. He staggered businesses hours to reduce crowding on streets, and he did this before the epidemic curve had peaked. And as a result, St. Louis' peak death rate was less than half of Philadelphia's, and the city cumulative mortality was the lowest of any major American city. Historians and epidemiologists today point to St. Louis as a textbook example of a non-pharmaceutical intervention working, because they targeted the causal pathway. And this graph tells us a powerful story. Two cities, same pandemic, same era, same lack of vaccines, same lack of antivirals, and the difference was not in their data, it was in their theory of causation. Philadelphia focused on what they could easily see and correlate: the military, the war effort, and St. Louis acted on a hypothesis about how disease spreads. And now, if we just see the different graphs, we can see that different cities of United States just picked very different models of what to do with the pandemic. And this is very interesting case. And the central tension, the central idea I want you to have is that big data can give us remarkably accurate correlations, but acting on them without causal understanding can lead us to targeting the wrong intervention, and sometimes it can cause more harm than good. And as some thoughts, my own thoughts out of this experiment is these two answers to two big questions. Why only big data is not enough for research? Big data is where research in big data and using big data is very powerful. But the idea is that just seeing correlation doesn't mean that there is a cause and effect chain. And it's our ethical, it should be our ethical standpoint to understand the causes and effects of different processes. And only if we add big data research to our understanding of causes, only then big data would be a powerful tool for us. And another question that I would say very logical: why can't we let AI decide then? For example, AI can mimic of how we think, of how we use contexts to build cause and effect chains. And here is also a very big problem, as I see, that AI is a master in algorithm thinking, but we as human beings, we use also other methods of thinking that AI just isn't capable of doing. It just can imitate them. So, for example, we can use our creative thinking, paradoxical thinking, even our intuition to just uh, see the dots that AI cannot see. And that is why it would be only our prerogative to act upon and decide what to do. And when we face, for example, these big catastrophic events, for example, as a Spanish flu pandemic, I believe that it's our obligation to just it's our obligation to not outsource the decision-making process and just try to use our capabilities of different methods of thinking to and our instruments to just decide the most ethical, the most just, and the most reasonable methods of acting out. And after this case, I would also want for you to think what's your stance now. So what should we do? For example, we can say that in a crisis, strong correlation is just enough to act, and speed matters. And I believe that's the reason why AI is so popular now. Because, for example, if you can find an answer to your question just in a second, or for example, if an AI can decide for you, for example, what to buy in a grocery store, what's more beneficial for your health, just in a second, well, that's very convenient. But when we face very strong crises, such as a Spanish flu or a pandemic, well, that's another case. B is like very historian-oriented way of thinking. When we just try to find the causal mechanism before large-scale interventions. And C, it depends on the level of harm, reversibility, and cost of waiting. So these all are ethical questions, and I want also you to think of what's your stance is on these large-scale crises, and maybe in your field, in your proficiency field, you have some cases where correlation was mistaken for causation. And if you have some cases of your own, it would be great if you would also say something about them, tell us about those cases. So you feel free to join in the
Hi, so Ishika this side. So
Mhm.
the point is, since artificial intelligence today is works on algorithms that are again not very accurate because there are subjective information that is fed in the algorithm based on where it is being produced, like the data that is being provided to the artificial intelligence and the algorithms that are there. So again, when it comes to the correlation and causal mechanisms, correlation can be provided by AI, but again, human intervention is required because since humans are the main witnesses of what is happening around, human intervention will always be required to see if the data can be applied accurately to the human situations that is happening around. We cannot just rely on the data. AI can speed matters in terms of providing data efficiently, but not in terms of decision making because there's a huge gap in what the data is there and how it can be applied to the real world situations.
So yes, thank you. I totally agree with what you said, and I also saw that you had a question in the chat. So yeah, to clear, Philadelphia followed more the first approach. So not like 100%, but they just bent the railroad system. So they just prevented military units to moving from one station to another station, from one part of the country to another part to the country. And St. Louis just followed approach 3 when they just uh, try to find the cause of the pandemic, and they formed a hypothesis that the problem was just contact person to person. So they banned the meetings. So it was very close to the approach number 3. So yeah, that's right. And yeah, regarding the AI uh, should not decide on these large scale problems, such large scale events. It's not AI is not inherently, for example, neutral. They inherit and often amplify the biases that are present in their training data. And since algorithms learn from historical human decisions, from human texts, from human behaviors, they also frequently absorb deep-seated prejudice or that can be related to different spheres. Some cognitive mistakes that we multiply by letting algorithm learn through the text where these biases or mistakes are present. So I would say that's yeah, the history and the history and the different approaches we can learn from the historical from the background of historical discipline teach us that I would say the key is data give us patterns, causality gives us understanding, and ethics give us responsibility. And I'd say that's that's a key thought of how we can be um, very ethical researchers in our field. And if we just data mine the the field of our expertise, it doesn't it 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 doesn't it doesn't mean that we do not need to think about ethical causes of our research. And in some cases, ethical causes are the most valuable outcomes of our research. So if you have any other stance on this question, or if you have your own cases on AI, or for example, your expertise, I'm happy to hear from you.
So since a lot of us here, a lot of us here are young researchers, so how do you think we can incorporate the speed of AI with the research that we do in social sciences, and what ethical aspects should we consider while doing the research using AI?
Well, that's kind of that's a big question, and first and foremost, I would answer that. That AI is very good at just as the AI is a great tool. So it's not a substitute of the research. It's just a tool. So AI can do some processes and some actions much better than you can as a human. For example, if you have a text and you need, for example, to dissect key points from this, well, the AI can do that much faster than you, and sometimes even more accurate. For example, if you read a big text, you can miss some points. AI, if it's trained correctly and if it's just powerful, it won't do that. It can be tied. So, but what AI can miss is some for example, metaphors or some things that author implies. So the idea is that you as a human, as a researcher, you are the designer of your research, and you should know the limits of your tools that you use. So different methods and different tools are for different problems. And for example, using AI is also like using any other instrument. We first and foremost should know the limits of AI. AI can hallucinate false citations, and that's why we should verify everything AI produces. Or our instrument AI can, for example, mislead us and skip sections of the text, and we should also verify that. So I would say that we should have in our heads some ethical considerations of this particular tool, considering also not only just as a tool, but also the biases and representations. So AI models reflect biases in the training data. And for example, when we use AI to build correlations, we just need to be critical of whether your AI assistant used some biases and incorporated in your research. So I would say that's just a mode of thinking. When you are a researcher of humanitarian sciences, it's crucial for you to just have in your head this framework, like some some products of your research can affect society, and therefore you should be extra ethical about what knowledge you produce. And for me, that's a question that I operate, and I think that's the right approach. So yeah, AI is just a very sophisticated tool, but it's still a tool.
Understood, sir. That is very. I've understood what you are trying. What you have tried to explain. Thank you for the insight. I also have one more question. Since you are a historian and you deal with a lot of data, a lot of manuscripts, a lot of history, a lot of text. So, what AI tools can be used to deal with a huge amount of data and still be efficient with the interpretations? Because in the interpretations part, of course, we cannot trust the AI as it is based on certain biases and algorithms, and it's very subjective, so we cannot rely on AI for the interpretations part. But with respect to a lot of data we deal with, you are a historian, you deal with a lot of text. I am in the field of geopolitics and international relations, and again, while I am analyzing, history plays an important role, and along with that, the diplomacy, the geopolitics that is going on, that plays an important role, for which human interpretation is required. But again, to deal with the data, to deal with the text, to deal with a lot of citations, what AI tools can be efficiently used to speed up the research process and still be accurate with it?
So okay, I also will be very brief with that. I try to be very brief with that because I also use AI constantly in my field of work. For example, I use AI when I build my research, when I build the structure of several lectures where I have, for example, insights of what I want to present, when I try to, for example, invent new modes of how to conduct the lecture and so on and so forth. So I use AI constantly. In academia, when we talk about research, I would say that summarizing papers is the field where we can use AI kind of sparingly. So, for example, literature reviews and summarizing articles. Here, most of the time, AI is more or less reliable. Or, for example, generating research questions. If, for example, you have some kind of design for your research, and you need to generate research questions or generate hypotheses, AI is also a good companion for that. Or analyzing data sets, for example, qualitative coding, statistical assistance, or, for example, writing a code itself. I cannot, for example, code. I do not know Python. I do not know coding in other systems. But sometimes I need to code in order to, for example, use some AI assistance and some programs. Some programs. So I use AI assistants to generate a code for me, and I also use AI systems here in my research. So even when we draft an academic writing, for example, draft a summary of a research I want to present, sometimes AI can structure your words more analytical, and it also can be very productive for you. Or, for example, where I would say everyone now uses AI is translating foreign language sources. I cannot, for example, read from German language, but my research was also about Germany. So I used AI assistants to just translate German into language I know, English or Russian. So I would say that in this particular fields, if we know the limitations of the tools, well, AI can be a great assistant. So, yeah.
Okay, so is there any particular tool that you use for the research that you conduct, like for amalgamating data? Because again, if I talk particularly about ChatGPT, there are a lot of issues with ChatGPT as well. It works well for certain things, but when dealing with huge amount of data, it lags and it hallucinates. That is what has been my experience. So, with respect to the particular tools that can be used for the research, would you suggest any that is used by you in academia and your research purposes?
Okay, let me think. On like day-to-day basis, I just use more or less like just mainstream AI system. For example, sometimes ChatGPT cannot read text properly, and I find out that DeepSeek, Manus, and Grok work a little bit better with understanding texts. And for example, on my day-to-day basis with simple tasks, just simple tasks, I use them more than ChatGPT. Considering other programs, just let me think which one I use and whether they have some AI things in them. I use Orange a lot, but it's more about working with big data. And Orange program is very good with finding correlation in text. So you can Google this program. It's very good for your data-driven research. I also use if I need to visualize my texts. For example, if I need to analyze a lot of a big corpus of texts, for example, inauguration speeches of American presidents or something like that, I also use Voyant tools. Voyant tools is a great site that can analyze big quantities of text and visualize them. And if you want to do some kind of discourse analysis, for example, Voyant tools is also very good in it. Cage Coder is a more like in-depth tool for this kind of research when we dig deeper into texts and if we conduct discourse analysis. But Cage Coder is now a little bit outdated, but I would say that there are more there are programs that do the same that are a little bit more sophisticated now. So that's like the programs I use more or less often.
Understood, sir. Thank you so much. Sir, so it was, if I'm getting it right, there was Orange, right? And there is Tusk. Is that correct? Is it possible
Yes,
to type
Orange.
the name of those tools for better clarity?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much, sir.
So it's Orange and Voyant tools. So yeah, they're in a chat. So if you have also some questions, but do not have, for example, a mic, then you can type them in the chat. I will also see what we have here.
Hello,
So
sir.
the
Hemant this
data.
side. Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes, sir. Sir, as your historian, so you deal with the plagiarism detection while you publish a paper or article. So my question regarding this is that how can we use AI in our research related field while at the same time looking plagiarism detection? And as Ishika asked, what are the can you give me some more particular AI tool that we can use in our research, whether in social science or geopolitics or international relations. So, some other particular AI tool that we can use while uh, conducting our research.
So okay, about this particular second part of your questions. The recommendations about which tool you can use would very much be dependent on what kind of research you make. For example, my PhD in history was about collective memory, and I need to uh, to analyze a lot of texts and see the correlations in the texts. So, for example, for this particular case, because it was like a methodology of discourse analysis, I used KeyH Coder. I also will provide the name of the program in the chat. And for more simpler tasks, I used Voyant tools, but why I used them and not any others? I used them because they correspond with methodology that I am into, the discourse analysis, and KH Coder and Voyant tools are very good at this particular field. And for example, Orange is, I would say, more sophisticated and more modern tool for that. And for example, if you, as a researcher, want to analyze speeches of politicians or some documents considering the politics, I would say these three tools would be more than enough for you to start. And if you have any other research, for example, problems, it's the AI tool would be very dependent of what's your design of research is. And about plagiarism, yeah, it's I would say a big conundrum in the academic field. And sometimes we can detect AI in the text, sometimes we cannot. And it's a question more for us, for a researcher. For example, for me, it's a kind of an ethical position that when I produce a research, I should know that it's my voice. It's not a voice of just an AI machine, but it's my voice. It's my research, and I want to other people hear my thoughts, my words. And I would say it's also just a question of ethics, because, well, sometimes you can cheat and you can get away with totally AI produced, for example, research, but it's bad for your soul and reputation.
So it's not a question, it's just an observation that since I write articles as well with respect to the geopolitics, a lot of times I don't use AI for writing. And while writing, since I'm from an academic background and I have a very academic language that I use while writing, when I check it for AI, it's flagged as AI, although it has not been written by AI. So that is a major issue I think a lot of researchers are facing nowadays, while their work, academically worded work, is also being flagged as AI, even though it's entirely written by them.
Yes, I would say
Yes,
it's
sir,
a
that's
big
what I
problem.
was
Yeah.
asking about.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Sir, the first part of the question that I was asking about the plagiarism detection. While we use AI tool or not, it sometimes shows that you have using the AI and it shows plagiarism. So how could we deal with all such things while using the AI?
If whether we can detect AI plagiarism using AI, is that the question you are asking?
Yes, sir.
Well, I never just faced with this particular problem because I mainly work as a researcher myself, and I do not, for example, need to detect plagiarism in other texts. But I would say that uh, if we just look at the tools we have, even the most sophisticated tools are um, cannot detect the cannot detect for 100% that this text was, for example, generated with AI or it was humanly written. But if sometimes we can use our intuition. For example, AI generated texts are seemingly too perfect. They are structured very correctly. They used only proper words. They used very cliched structures of the logical thought. And sometimes we use these structures ourselves, but with the AI, these cliches, these patterns just pile up, and sometimes that we can just use our intuition and detect the AI correctly. So I cannot give any more insightful thoughts on that one because it's kind of not my particular expertise.
Okay, sir. Thanks a lot.
And yeah, I also agree with Krish Kumar Tiwari with the idea that AI can be we can use AI to understand biases themselves. So yeah, that's kind of the idea to use AI in order to find correlations in a text. So yeah, these two can find correlations, so we can use it in these fields. Okay, if you don't have any more questions, thank you for your attention. Here is the email. If you have some questions you want me to answer, or if you have some questions about um, the research or the historian's perspective, you can also mail me. So yeah, I think that's it for my section, and thank you for having me here. It was my pleasure and honor to just uh, provide some thoughts or ideas that I had considering the research.
Thank you so much, Professor Nikita, for your insights. The way you have reflected somehow causal effects and data analytics and how AI is different from the human intelligence. And I know if we 100% dependent on AI, certainly our work will be detected as an AI. So my suggestion to participants also, kindly just try to write your own self, give maximum resources, the primary resources, so that can be minimize AI detection. See, once we write to our thesis, yeah, any research proposals through the secondary source, and just so it might detect AI. So the proper solution is that let's try to work on maximum the primary source, and the primary source may some help to reduce some AI detection in terms of plagiarism. So this is my personal experience also. And as a social scientist, you have a very well correlated properly through the history that how data works, and how causality gives you understanding, causal factor gives you understanding, data gives you somehow direction, navigation, and sometimes the data might be politicized. The question is that who is producing the data? Let me give you a very a recent example. And the war is going on between Iran and USA, and some of the media resources from the Western side, they are giving the different data. Iranian media, yeah, from the west side, they are giving the different data. The question is which data is accurate. That's the problem. So I think as a social scientist, let's try to maximize our sources from the primary, and this is the only way. And but as a social science professor, as a historian, Professor Nikita, you have very beautifully explained, and this is what required. And we understand that we are all from coming social science background, so we couldn't expect as a pure technical AI solution. And for that, the upcoming session we have professor from the IIT Roorkee, is a top institute from India. So she would be explaining the technical part. So I'm sure that audiences may get new insights on somehow like coding, and somehow Python, and somehow very technical part of AI. So from that upcoming session. So thank you so much. As a historian, as a social scientist, you have very beautifully explained the role of data, the role of causality, and the role of ethics also. Thank you so much, Professor Nikita, and I'm sure that my audience must have been benefited from your insights. Any question?
Thank you very much.
Any comments? Any last finally from the participants? No. So okay, thank you so much. We have with the next session 4 o'clock. So I would request you all to join again the 4 o'clock. Thank you, Nikita, Professor Nikita.